Thank you very much. Well, good morning, and thank you all for attending this morning. I also had a chance to be at the Gecko Bar last night. Fortunately, got a little bit of sleep, and hope over the next 20 or so minutes to spend a little bit of time talking about today's topic, which is recession and innovation. I did get a lot of feedback and buzz from yesterday that people wanted me to spend a little more time on the latter than the former. I think we all have a good sense of the financial situation we're in. So I want to really send you a message of hope and inspiration around the things that are going on in our industry, and it's a little bit of advice on how companies like Microsoft and other companies like advertisers, agencies can work together to find their way through to a better place during this current time. I want to start my presentation just talking about going back 10 years and talking about conferences like this and what I would call a back-in-the-time speech. It was a back-in-the-time speech when we would talk about, oh, I know not many people have these devices today, but you just wait, soon there'll be a hockey stick, and a lot of these devices will proliferate, these electronic devices. It was a time when we talked about the proliferation of broadband, and we would say 10 years ago, you know, I know most people are on dial-up, but there will be a time when most of the world goes on to broadband. It was also a time 10 years ago when we talked about different scenarios. We talked about things like photos, and we talked about music, and we talked about video. We said, you know, just wait. There will be a time when all of these things will go digital. And when all of this happens, it's gonna bring in an era, a new era of digitization. So now it's about 10 years later, and just an update, a lot of this stuff actually did happen. In fact, a lot of the predictions that we had 10 years ago were quite conservative. There was a study done at MIT, this is back in the late 1990s, and there were a bunch of computer scientists that went out and tried to measure how much digital information is created in the world every year. And that's a pretty big task, right? They had to measure photos and emails and anything digital, and they tried to measure the total size of it. And at the time in the late 90s, they measured that size in a term called exabyte. An exabyte is basically 1 million terabytes. And at the time they said, well, in the late 1990s, we think globally we create about 2 exabytes of digital information every year. And then they said, well, in about 5 years, we think that'll go up tenfold. We think there'll be 10 or 20 exabytes of information created every year. Well, if you actually went forward to about 2005, they were actually wrong, and most people thought they had way over forecast. Well, in fact, in 2005, there were over 100 exabytes of digital information created. And if you look at it today there's 1,000 plus exabytes of information created every year in the global economy. And this is what I call this fundamental digitization of the economy. Now, what exactly happened? Well, if you go around the world, first of all, there's 2.6 billion internet users in the world. And if the last time I checked, there's only 6 billion people. So that means half of the world's population is on the internet on a regular basis. Now, how could that possibly be? Because there's only 1.2 billion PCs. Well, if you go to a lot of emerging markets, you can go into iCafes, you can go into schools, you can go into other public use centers, and people are accessing the internet, even if it's not just from the device that they own or use on a daily basis. So that's kind of factor number one in digitization. The other thing that's happened is technology adoption has been a lot faster than we ever assumed. So if you go back into the early part of last century and you look at something like the adoption of the radio or the adoption of television, it actually took 20, 30, 40 years for a new popular technology to go from 0 to, say, maximum adoption, which may be the 80 or 90%. But as we've gone along with technology, each new technology is taking a shorter and shorter amount of time to become mainstream. So if you take something like the digital camera in Europe and the United States, 10 years ago, only 10% of households had a digital camera. Today in the United States and Europe, it's over 80% of households have digital cameras. So what's going on is, first of all, you've got half of the world's population on the internet, which is driving digitization. You've got radical and rapid device adoption, which is driving digitization. And then finally, and probably most importantly, we've seen a major change among users. Let me describe this third phenomenon. If you look at the history of the PC, which is really just over the last 30 years, most people in the technology industry would say that technologists were delivering far more than consumers or end users needed. And it was always a struggle. It was always the dream of technology dragging the consumer to the next stage of adoption. What we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is a rapid and just a complete reversal of that, where now the consumer in their wants and needs is ahead of what technology can deliver. This is pretty profound if you think about it, because we call it in Microsoft and other companies the consumerization of technology. So as a company in the early days, what we had to do is we had to go to enterprises and we had to work with like really leading edge people to help drive our innovation. But now, for companies like Microsoft, we actually go to just the average consumer and say, what exactly do you want and what are we not providing for you? Let me give you just a couple of examples of that. So my daughter is 9 years old, and she's grown up in a world of technology. She wouldn't recognize a rotary phone. If it was sitting in front of her, she wouldn't know how to dial it. And when she goes out and she buys a stuffed animal, I've seen her literally do this. She'll buy a stuffed animal, and she immediately looks for the tag so that she can go on the internet and create a virtual life for her stuffed animal. I mean, that's the thing that she expects. She's 9 years old. She spends far more time on the computer than she does on the television. And recently I went to one of her school presentations, and she was doing a study on Eva Peron. This is a 9-year-old girl. And she had created a complete multimedia presentation with text, video, music, photos on Eva Peron on her own in her computer class. And it wasn't computer class like we know it, which was how do you program and how do you create computer languages. It's computer class just as another tool in the way that kids get educated today. Do you know, they asked a question in the United States, and they said to teenagers, they said, okay, if you had two choices, one, these aren't great choices, but one was to turn off your television and the other choice was to turn off your computer, which would you choose? 4 out of 5 said they would abandon the television in favor of the computer so that they could do social networking, email, gaming, and other things. So this is a really profound change at the younger age of our demographic. Now let's go all the way to the other side, which is my mother, who's 69, lives in Kamloops, British Columbia. Even my mother, who's not that computer literate, is beginning to dream of things that technology doesn't yet deliver. She says to me, well, Darren, I have all these contacts on my phone. Can you just put them onto my computer? Why can't these contacts just get onto my computer? Or why do I have 5 remote controls in the living room? Can't you guys at Microsoft and other companies work to just create a single remote control? Why is that not possible? And you can see even in my mother's mind, and she's not a software expert or anything, but she understands that all of these things around her are now digital, and in some way they should be able to connect to one another. Interesting fact, the fastest growing population of computer users in the United States are people over the age of 75. You know, that seems almost counterintuitive, right? Because you think, well, you're over the age of 75, why would you bother, learning this new set of skills? Well, what's going on is that younger demographic, the grandkids and the kids, are wanting to communicate with their grandparents using technology. They want to text, they want to email, they want to send messages and photos and videos to their grandparents, and their grandparents, these empty nesters, are now buying computers and learning to do and leverage technology so they can communicate with generations who've grown up in an entirely different time. So think about that. Broad level digitization across multiple devices, users now leading the change, and technology companies looking to catch up. One more trend I want to share with you is this whole issue of convergence. And if you read the newspaper any day, other than the negative news, you'll read lots of things about digital television standards coming to here, this sort of thing going on Twitter, this kind of thing going on with the iPhone. You read all of these things, and it's hard sometimes to connect all the pieces. The way to think about it is, as all information goes digital, for a software person, that means all of these devices and things, the software underlying them is all made up of ones and zeros. So when you go from analog to digital, there's the opportunity that all of these things can actually speak to one another, and that the difference between a PC and a phone is just a question of screen size and keyboard size if you look way into the future. As everything becomes ones and zeros, there's this tremendous opportunity for these devices and these things to all interoperate and connect to one another. This is extremely, extremely profound. And what companies like Microsoft and others are doing are to work on those standards and work on that interoperability so that more and more and more you're going to see scenarios of these devices coming together and converging. You know, some people write stories like the death of the PC, right? They could also write stories about the death of the phone, because at the end of the day, these devices are all going to be actually quite similar. They're just going to be a difference in terms of the way that you use it, the human interface with the device. But most of us will have multiple devices for multiple purposes, and I don't even know what we're going to call all of these things in the future. But because of the digitization of technology and the convergence issues, these things are going to come together and actually be quite connected. And that's happening as we speak. If you go, for instance, take Xbox. There's 30 million users of Xbox in the world. 2/3 of them play Xbox online. And today, using common identification, an Xbox user on a console can play against a PC user on the other side of the world in exactly the same game format. Here's another great example. This is again on the area of convergence. When we launch our next operating system, Windows 7, there's this great little technology inside of it called Home Group. Now, how does Home Group work? Well, if you look on your normal PC, you have a bunch of yellow folders, and those yellow folders generally represent locations on your hard drive where you put photos or videos or Word documents. In Windows 7, you'll have these blue glossy folders we call Home Group. And the way it works is when you go to set up a home group, you'll click the button and it'll say, oh, Darren, I recognize that you've got 3 PCs in your home. You've got a photo frame. You've got a television. You've got an electronic toaster, whatever it is. Would you like to create a group among these items? And for that blue folder A, we'll call it Home Group A. It'll be my PC, my daughter's PC, my work PC, a storage location on the web, and maybe my grandmother's photo frame, right, on the other side of the country. And every time I drag a file into Home Group A, it'll populate itself automatically on all of those devices simultaneously. Right? So gone are the issues of like worrying that you're going to lose a photo. But you see how convergence now, through just common file formats, allows you to seamlessly, and it's one of the most wonderful, practically magic experiences you'll have, seamlessly populate those documents on multiple devices and in multiple locations all at the same time. That's the beauty of what's going on in creating this new digital canvas. So I wanted to really get people kind of oriented with that. I call it the canvas. And I'm going to share with you now a video of the future that I think is frankly not too far away as these devices begin to come together and users drive us to new levels of digitization. So.